This real side experience would begin with a rescue. As the deciders of our simulated experiences, it is we who are responsible for placing ourselves in situations of peril. Even though consciously we may perhaps have been unaware of the ideas that were being installed and agreed with, as very often the vaster bulk of idea bombardment will bypass our conscious consideration and nestle subconsciously. The consciousness is very much like a computer. It simply receives and retains the data of everything as provided it via the senses on the physical level. These we would categorize as ideas, and every idea then a consciousness installed, regardless of if we are conscious or unconscious as to its installation, will affect its nature. We will experience at some moment the simulation that reflects it in some shape or form. The process of awareness is a moving into a position of a consciousness detachment and disassociation that, although we still will make use of the mechanics for creating purposes, that even though the computer-like consciousness will still be programmed with idea bombardment as we go about our lives, as we no longer are in complete agreement with the consciousness, as we will be until we begin the process of facing and releasing it, then we are divorced from being resigned to experience, however it has been constructed idea-wise. But as I said, for those immersed in the consciousness only, everything it comprises of idea-wise can potentially at any moment feature as their experience. And as televisions are as a constant source of ideas, with the endless themes they portray, some of which are indeed very horrific, nightmarish, involving monsters and all manner of situations in relation to them, little wonder then that individuals may find themselves in equally as nightmarish scenarios on the real side, and potentially as physical level situations also, as everything will begin on the real side, idea agreements instantly reflecting their nature, and take the moments they do to filter through to the physical. But to feature on the physical they will, if the idea agreement is retained, which it will be if the consciousness has had these movie themes installed, and the individual is one who is completely consciousness immersed. Even should an individual categorize what is portrayed on the screen as that which they dislike, it still has claimed their attention. It will be a consciousness installed, and indeed they can enhance it with emotion as they are repelled by its nature and make it more potent, make it more likely to manifest, as it has somewhat taken the forefront of their agreements through the shock-inducing nature of it, as the impacting experiences tend to be those we cling to more so. But regardless, just as readily can and will its nature be potentially as experience affected just as any other idea where no additional consideration was applied. As I said, this can lead to situations where agreements are secured that facilitate attacks and kidnappings on the real side, as oftentimes what is portrayed movie-wise will forge links and connections with the various beings and body forms of an ill-intended nature, and based on the kind of scenarios on the screen will be the nature of the experience shared with such beings, the permissions they have, the parameters they can work within. And very often are there movies of entities or demonic-like beings capturing humans and dragging them to their dismal realms. Unsurprisingly then, this becomes as actual experience on the real side. Realistically, as we have created the idea agreements, set the stage for our situations, and including the role of a kidnapper or abuser that such ill-intended beings can assume, we can also install additional ideas that can present the roles of a rescuer according to the individual. And if we take on such a provided role, it is because the one we are attempting to assist has afforded it, as they are the movie maker, and we must operate within their dictates. And in reality, they are actually deciding to extricate themselves from their predicament. They just have elected to provide a role where another, if agreeable, can do so on their behalf. And as I said, the process of awareness is a gradual releasing of the consciousness, but until this is complete, ill-intended beings and dark force characters alike can take advantage of the ideas still unreleased, where they can kidnap, torture, abuse, etc., but where the agreements are available, where the victim has extended the permissions, the movie roles, can we step in and afford assistance if it makes sense to do so, which it will if we are aiding those on their awareness process with the intent to ultimately recognize the ears, but that have fallen foul to the ill-intended through the ideas yet unreleased that have been taken advantage of. For those not choosing such, the awareness process, those content to remain consciousness immersed, as the ideas which present as their unsavoury situations, they will not be choosing to release, then we could be rescuing them forever, as the ideas which effected circumstances which required rescue are retained, and can always be then as a constant experience potential. And so, when we assume the roles as rescuers, we tend to be assisting those that are at various stages of their awareness processes, and it would be so here in this experience. I would find myself walking down a disused railway track, at that moment the personal self oblivious as to its purpose, but as is invariably the case, the real awareness is dictating affairs, utilizing a simulated self for the various real side engagings, assignments and rescues, where interaction with the simulation and the simulated created self of others is involved. The personal self rather just observes and recalls what transpired on waking as best as it is able. As I proceeded, my surroundings consisting of rotting, uninhabitable buildings in advanced states of decay, the railway track would lead me to a tunnel, the sense of malevolence very tangible emanating from it, but enter the tunnel I would. The gloomy, ill-illuminated tunnel would open up eventually into a far larger area, becoming more as though a cave, appearance-wise, with the various passageways connecting off from it and descending downwards deeper into the ground. The purpose of my presence became apparent, as huddled together in this cave would be a group of individuals, humans, that impressions revealed were indeed those stepping up, becoming more aware, but had fallen foul to as yet unreleased agreements in their respective consciousnesses that had them in this predicament. For as it transpired, they were being held hostage, too terrified seemingly to even attempt to escape, but open to the potentiality of rescue. Almost at the moment I arrived and determined the situation's nature, would their captors make themselves known. For scuttling from the various passageways that connected with the main cave would be a monstrous, insectoid-like beings, bipedal in their overall body design. They were not, however, forms before the secondary personal self had been established. They very much were body forms where the personal self was developed and indeed operating predominantly, and consciousnesses of an ill-intended abrasive persuasion, as they had jumped at the chance to secure these stepping up humans where the agreements allowed. If they were affiliated with the dark forces was never determined, but their actions certainly would be pleasing for the reptilian dark force controllers, as naturally such action would serve as disruptive to the humans' processes of awareness. These insect beings were not especially technologically orientated or indeed intellectually developed, hence the rather basic cave-like dwelling they resided within. It was as though the decaying buildings, the railway track that led to these caves could readily have been a scene from a movie. As I said, those kidnapped had effected the simulated layout, the scene, and the insectoids had fallen over themselves to assume the roles of captors. The insectoids would be brandishing very crude spear-like weapons. This seemed the extent of the danger they represented, although I'm sure they could have delivered damage through their very bodies, judging by the mandibles the body forms possessed. The humans were terrified enough that any further action on the insect's part was unnecessary, besides their threatening presence, but they would recognize the threat I posed to their ability to retain the humans. As such, as they poured from the passageways, they would begin launching their spears at me, and so was it necessary for the real awareness to afford extreme agility to its created simulated self to avoid being impaled. As I've often shared, that which we decide, the choices we make, the extent of our abrasiveness, all are as ideas that we will walk into at some stage. Everything we choose will be reflected in some shape or form, and on the real side this is far more immediate, and assuming there are no agreements that allow the ill-intended success in their intended means of abrasiveness, then they will as though instantly have the destructive nature of such intent ideas rebounded back at them, and this will take whatever simulated form it might, generally then as us putting down their attempted assaults, sometimes in a very exaggerated manner. In this case, as I successfully evaded their spears, many of which would be as though repelled and deflected, as though by a shield of some kind, that many of the insectoids fell foul to their own weapons, as the spears reflected back at them and thudded into their bodies. I would then gather from the ground a kind of organic mass that seemed a feature of the cave systems. It had the appearance of snake-like writhing tendrils, and although my handling of it caused me no harm, this organic material was lethal to the insectoids. Any physical contact with it would be as effective a means of insect dispatching as their own spears. And so I would wield this snake-like material, and as the remaining insectoids charged me, so they were put down as they made contact with it, to the extent that their numbers would thin, and eventually those that remained would abandon their decided objective, that of containment of the humans, and scuttle back down the passageways to wherever they might lead. And from there, with the insectoids no longer presenting a threat, so the humans would accompany me as I led them from the cave, back through the passageways I had initially entered through, and we exited the tunnel and were back onto the streets again. It's possible the houses may be representational of each of the humans' consciousnesses. That they were in decay suggested the process of releasing agreement to the consciousness that each house represented, as though less and less attention were they giving to the maintenance of their consciousness representing houses, and the tunnel into the darkness representing that of the consciousness which they were unconscious of, the agreements yet to be released, some of which allowed and effected the harrowing experience with the insectoid beings, that they then required and allowed themselves rescue from. In a sense, then, the experience could be construed as the facing of this particular agreement and its subsequent release. There was a brief, unrelated scene that followed, although one that would still feature a train track, for indeed, as I observed, would I be standing in a kind of high-tech sophisticated train station, and a tubular, shuttle-like train vehicle would pull to a halt within it. Exiting the train would be a group of reptilians, presenting as their reptilian forms bipedal, green-scaled and tailed lizard body types. My impressions revealed they were stepping up reptilians, and every time I am shown any evidence that reptilians are stepping up and choosing to become more aware, I make a point of sharing it, regardless of how brief the experience may be, just to reiterate the point that regardless of the body form, regardless of the choices and decisions each have made, and the design of their consciousness, all of it is just a simulated unreality, and what animates through it all is this real awareness which has the same fundamental drive inclination, that of recognizing the ears it is a part of. And from what I've seen on the real side, just as many, if not more, reptilians are stepping up as any other body form in creation. And these reptilians would be accompanied by another being, humanoid in appearance, that my impressions revealed was a real guide, though the guide's identity was never revealed. As the reptilians exited the train and accompanied the guide, for every step they took it was as though the scales were dropping from their bodies, and they were becoming progressively less reptilian and more so forms of a pure light, quite clearly suggesting a releasing of attachment to the consciousness and the body forms effected from it, to the embracing of that which they and everybody actually is, real awareness beings of light. Although one of the reptilians was having more a struggle than the others with releasing the attachments of the consciousness, in particular the attachment he had with his body form itself, and it was as though for every scale and part of his reptilian body form that fell away, he tried to have it as though reapplied, and it would vaguely reform over his light body, but as though unable to remain so before fading once again. As the decider of his experience and positioning with life, if he really wanted his created form, he would retain it. His personal self trying to emotionally cling on to the idea of the body form seemingly a struggle, as I said. But as he continued walking with the guide and the other reptilians, who were more so fully embracing the reality of what they actually are, the real awareness, it was as though, despite the personal self and its wants, overall his intent was ears placed, and ultimately he would progressively become as a being of light as the others of his group were. For he had continued to walk with the guide, and should he have chosen to step back into the personal self, very likely this would present in the experience as him stopping in his tracks, and the guide and the other reptilians would have proceeded onwards, leaving him to his limiting creational choices. In a final scene, would I have revealed the potentiality of a physical level happening, whereby, whatever the cause or reason, it was as though the planet Mars had been in some way impacted, and great chunks of the planet were on a collision course trajectory with Earth, which would have devastating, life-ending consequences, should this real side situation, based on agreement as it currently stands, process through to the physical, as it will if the ideas that effect such a scenario are retained as the forerunning overall agreement in the human collective consciousness. Additionally, would I find myself speaking briefly with Duane? What was shared I fail to recall on waking, however, as Duane gestured, so would come into view a boxing ring. A tournament had been taking place, in which the participants progress onwards, eventually to face a final competitor, and should they be victorious, they are established as the winner, etc. I would only witness the final bout, where one of the two finalists was none other than the actor Dolph Lundgren. Ironically enough, he did play the part of a boxer in the Rocky series, only here he would be successful and claim the prize, a substantial quantity of money. This experience I may have overlooked, but for the fact that Duane featuring in it would draw my attention to it, and on waking would I recollect how Duane once shared that at one time the form of a Superman very much represented himself in earlier experiences, but that later the form would become more so that of He-Man, and indeed specifically Dolph Lundgren, who played the part in the movie adaptation of it. For what was represented here then, as Dolph Lundgren claimed the purse, was as though suggesting of Duane's imminent success where the funding is concerned, a verification that it is indeed impending, that Duane had gone through the arduous ordeal of the boxing tournament, being knocked down but always getting back up, to eventually get through the process that the funding securing demanded, and to stand ultimately successful, his objective completed, the funding released to him.
Okay, that was cool, Kevin. Yes, I used to, when I was young, I used to like Superman, George Reeves as Superman. And this was always fun for me because that was in the 50s and I was a youngster then, born in 48, and Superman came out in about 51, 52, something like that, and used to watch it when it first came on TV later on. And then as years went by, eventually, after the Rod of Power situation, one night I had the experience where, the image of Dolph Lundgren came in with a new Superman outfit and punched the old George Reeves out. And I thought that was very interesting that they chose Dolph Lundgren because he played in that movie, Masters of the Universe. And his initials, Dolph Lundgren He-Man, are the same as mine, DLH. And so the boys are funny, aren't they? Yes. Yes, thank you so much. So, yeah, it's been about a lot of bouts like Rocky, up and down, in and out, and with just everything. And that's how it is. But the best part of all this is the challenge. And when you really learn to see what the is all about, that's the best part. So it's no longer chasing freedom, but it's being free of restrictions. Just like in your experience there, again, the reptilians, everybody wants freedom, but they don't get it. It's not about chasing an idea, because there's no such thing. It's like the air we breathe. It has nothing to do with freedom. It's simply releasing the restrictions and being real and wonderful with all life and learning to see what it is. So, thank you so much. That's so cool. Yeah, it's just a lot of fun. And the best part for me is to be here and to share and do this for everybody, to see everybody successful. Yes, thank you so much. You're the great witness, Kevin. Thank you.